Your soulmate finally has proof you aren't wrong. Everything is changing now. Stay with me for a moment and don't rush through this, because what's unfolding right now isn't loud or dramatic, but it is powerful. For a long time, you carried a quiet knowing inside you. A feeling you couldn't fully explain, even when you tried. You sensed that what you felt was real, that what you saw wasn't imagination, that what your heart understood wasn't a story you made up to protect yourself. Still, there were moments when doubt crept in. Moments when you wondered if you were asking for too much, feeling too deeply, or holding on to something that only existed on your side. What's happening now is bringing an end to that uncertainty. Your soulmate has reached a point where reality can no longer be avoided. The patterns they ignored are repeating. The lessons they postponed are confronting them. And the truth you carried quietly is now being confirmed by circumstances they can't explain away. This isn't about guilt or punishment. It's about awareness finally catching up to feeling. For a long time, you were ahead emotionally. You noticed shifts before they were spoken. You felt distance before it was acknowledged. You sensed hesitation before it showed in actions. You weren't imagining that. You were reading what was there, even when others chose not to look. That kind of awareness can feel lonely, especially when the person you're connected to isn't ready to see what you see. But something has changed. Your soulmate is now experiencing what you tried to express, not through your words, but through their own life. Situations are unfolding that mirror what you warned about. Emotions they dismissed are surfacing in ways they can't control. The confusion they once avoided has become unavoidable. And in the middle of this, they remember you. Not just as a person they loved or cared about, but as the one who understood before understanding was convenient. This realization doesn't come all at once. It arrives in waves. A moment of clarity here. A memory there. A sudden recognition during an ordinary day when something goes wrong or something feels empty. They start connecting dots they once kept separate. They realize that what you said wasn't criticism. It was insight. What you felt wasn't insecurity. It was intuition. And now, they have proof. Proof doesn't always come as a single event. Sometimes it comes as a pattern repeating until it can't be denied. Sometimes it comes as loss, or emotional distance, or the collapse of something that looked stable on the surface. Sometimes it comes as the quiet realization that ease was mistaken for alignment. Your soulmate is now standing in that realization. They are seeing that the things you asked for weren't unreasonable. That your need for clarity wasn't drama. That your desire for depth wasn't pressure. It was compatibility. It was honesty. It was readiness. This is where everything begins to shift. Because once someone sees the truth for themselves, they can't unsee it. Even if they try to move forward, something inside them has changed. They start questioning choices they once felt confident about. They start noticing the absence of what you brought into their life. Not just affection, but awareness. Not just love, but presence. They realize that you weren't difficult. You were discerning. That realization carries weight. It forces them to look at their own patterns, their own avoidance, their own comfort with surface-level connection. It forces them to confront the fact that what you offered required growth, and what they chose required less. This isn't an easy place for them to be. Awareness often arrives with discomfort. But it's also where change becomes possible. And while this is happening for them, something else is happening for you. You are no longer fighting to be understood. You've reached a point where you trust what you felt, even without validation. You don't need them to say, "You were right," for you to know it. The peace you're feeling now doesn't come from being proven correct. It comes from no longer doubting yourself. That's important. Because when truth finally arrives for the other person, it arrives at a time when you are no longer waiting for it. You are no longer emotionally suspended. You are rooted in your own clarity. This changes the dynamic completely. Your soulmate may now feel a pull toward you that feels different from before. Not driven by chemistry alone, but by recognition. Recognition that what you shared was rare. Recognition that you saw them clearly. Recognition that you held a mirror they weren't ready to face at the time. They may feel regret. Or admiration. Or a quiet sadness for what could have been handled differently. But alongside that, there is respect. Respect changes how love feels. It removes entitlement. It removes assumptions. It replaces them with humility. This is why everything is changing now. Not because of one conversation. Not because of one sign. But because awareness has finally aligned on both sides. Whether or not paths fully realign, the truth has settled. You were not wrong. You were not asking for too much. You were not misreading the connection. You were simply early. And being early often feels like being alone. But now, the timing has shifted. The truth you carried has found its confirmation, and with that confirmation comes transformation. For them, it's a reckoning. For you, it's release. What happens next doesn't need to be forced. It doesn't need to be chased. Whatever unfolds will unfold from a place of clarity, not confusion. From honesty, not hope alone. This is the moment when doubt dissolves. This is the moment when your inner knowing becomes solid ground. And this is only the beginning of what that truth will change. Stay with this feeling a little longer, because what's happening now is deeper than validation. It's not just about them realizing something you already knew. It's about how that realization is quietly rearranging everything inside both of you. For a long time, you were carrying clarity without confirmation. That's one of the hardest positions to be in emotionally. You saw patterns before they repeated. You sensed consequences before they arrived. You felt the emotional imbalance even when things looked fine on the surface. And yet, you kept questioning yourself, not because you lacked intuition, but because you hoped love would prove you wrong. That hope cost you more than you realized. Now, something has shifted. The proof your soulmate is facing didn't come because they finally listened to you. It came because life taught them the lesson in its own language. And life is always more convincing than words. They are now living inside the very feelings you once tried to describe. The uncertainty. The emotional restlessness. The sense that something important is missing, even when everything looks okay. This is where empathy and distance begin to coexist. They are starting to understand how lonely it must have felt for you to see all of this before they were ready. They may not say it out loud, but there is a quiet recognition forming. A recognition that you weren't trying to control the situation. You were trying to protect the connection. That realization changes how they remember you. Not as someone who asked for too much, but as someone who understood too much. Memory reshapes itself when awareness grows. Moments they once dismissed now feel significant. Conversations they brushed past now replay with new meaning. They notice the patience you had, the restraint you showed, the way you tried to communicate without accusing. And with that comes a subtle grief. Not the dramatic kind, but the kind that sits quietly in the chest. The grief of realizing that something real was present, and it wasn't fully met in time. This is where things begin to feel different for them emotionally. The confidence they once had in their decisions softens. They start questioning what they prioritized. They begin to see how comfort sometimes replaced courage. And courage is what your connection required. At the same time, your internal experience is no longer tied to whether they see the truth or not. That chapter has closed. You're not watching for signs anymore. You're not scanning their behavior for meaning. You're not holding your breath, waiting for acknowledgement. That release is powerful. You are now standing in your own clarity, and clarity feels different than validation. Validation depends on someone else's recognition. Clarity belongs to you. You feel steadier now. Not because everything is resolved, but because you trust yourself again. You no longer feel the need to argue your reality. You know what you felt, and you know why. This is where emotional balance begins to return. Your soulmate senses this shift too. They feel that you are no longer emotionally reaching toward them. That you're not waiting in the same way. That your energy is self-contained, grounded, and less reactive. This is unsettling for them, but also grounding. Because when someone stops asking to be understood, it forces understanding to rise on its own. They may now feel an urge to reconnect, but it's different from before. It's not driven by fear of loss alone. It's driven by respect. By the awareness that if they approach you now, it must be from a more honest place. They can't come back casually. That's the consequence of clarity. You're no longer available for half-truths or emotional ambiguity. You're no longer willing to hold the emotional weight of two people. And they can feel that boundary, even if it's unspoken. Boundaries change dynamics more than ultimatums ever could. This is also where timing reveals its role. Timing was never about whether love existed. It was about readiness. You were ready to see the truth. They weren't. Now the gap has closed, but it closed through experience, not persuasion. That matters. Because lessons learned through experience carry humility. They create change that lasts longer. Your soulmate is now sitting with the awareness that what you offered was rare. Not because you were perfect, but because you were present. You didn't run from depth. You didn't avoid difficult conversations. You didn't replace honesty with distraction. They see that now. And seeing that doesn't just affect how they feel about you. It affects how they see themselves. They are questioning their own emotional patterns. Their tendency to delay. Their comfort with surface-level ease. Their avoidance of discomfort. This self-questioning is uncomfortable, but necessary. And you are no longer inside that process. That's important. You don't need to guide them through it. You don't need to explain it again. You don't need to soften it so it's easier for them to swallow. They are facing it on their own. And that's the only way real change happens. For you, the change feels quieter, but more stable. You're not replaying the past as much. When memories come up, they don't destabilize you. They feel like information, not wounds. You're beginning to see the connection as something that taught you about yourself. About your capacity for insight. About your emotional intelligence. About your ability to love deeply without losing your sense of self. Those qualities didn't disappear when the relationship shifted. They returned to you. And now, you're carrying them forward with more discernment. You are no longer trying to prove that you were right. Being right is no longer the point. Peace is. Your soulmate may eventually speak their realization out loud. Or they may not. Awareness doesn't always translate into conversation. Sometimes it lives quietly in someone's inner world. But whether they speak or stay silent, the truth has already done its work. It has shifted power back into balance. You are no longer ahead of them emotionally in a way that feels lonely. You are simply aligned with yourself. And alignment changes everything. It changes what you tolerate. It changes what you wait for. It changes what kind of love you're available for. You're not interested in being understood eventually. You want to be met now. This doesn't mean you've closed your heart. It means you've opened your standards. If your soulmate steps forward from this place, it will be different. Slower. More intentional. More honest. If they don't, you are not left with unanswered questions. You already have your answer. The truth you carried alone has finally been confirmed, not to justify your pain, but to release it. You were never wrong. You were simply early. And now, you are free to move forward without carrying the weight of doubt, explanation, or emotional labor that was never meant to be yours alone. This is not the end of the story. It's the moment where it finally belongs to you. Stay here with this understanding, because now the truth is no longer arriving as a realization, it's becoming a reorientation. What your soulmate has discovered doesn't just change how they see the past, it changes how they experience the present. And for you, something even deeper is happening. You're no longer standing in the aftermath of being misunderstood. You're standing in the quiet power of self-trust. For a long time, your awareness felt like a burden. You carried insights without a place to set them down. You sensed outcomes before they unfolded, but you still hoped they wouldn't. That hope kept you emotionally invested longer than was fair to you. You told yourself that love required patience, understanding, flexibility. And while those things are true, what you didn't realize was how much you were bending yourself to keep the connection intact. Now, that bending has stopped. And the moment it stopped, your inner world began to feel steadier. Your soulmate is now discovering something that you lived with for a long time, the cost of ignoring emotional truth. They are realizing that clarity delayed doesn't disappear, it accumulates. And when it finally arrives, it doesn't arrive gently. It arrives with weight. They're feeling that weight now. They may not articulate it clearly, but they feel the shift. Things that once felt simple now feel hollow. Choices they made with confidence now feel questionable. They're not spiraling, they're waking up. And waking up can feel disorienting before it feels freeing. They are beginning to understand that you weren't asking for reassurance because you were insecure. You were asking for alignment because you were attuned. You weren't trying to control the direction of the connection. You were trying to understand where it was actually going. That distinction matters. And it's landing for them now, not as blame, but as insight.